Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go to my review of WCW's Bash at the Beach 1996. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psychosis. I thought this was a great match to start Bash at the Beach 96. Back and forth matchup between Mysterio and Psychosis, with Mysterio keeping the pace of the match. Psychosis then hits a spin kick on Rey in the middle of the ring. Psychosis then hits a devastating leg drop off the top rope on Rey as well. Rey then finally gets up, hits a Hurricane Rana off the apron on Psychosis. Psychosis then hits a senton off the top rope to the outside on Rey Mysterio. Psychosis then gets in the ring, hits an enziguri on Mysterio. Mysterio then hits a Hurricane Rana off the top, sending Psychosis to the outside. Rey then throws Psychosis into the ring. Rey then hits a slingshot moonsault on Psychosis. Psychosis then goes for a top rope maneuver on Rey Mysterio, but Rey Mysterio counters it with a Frankensteiner, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Rey Mysterio Jr. Hats off to Rey Mysterio Jr. for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is John Tenta versus Big Bubba in a silver dollar match. I thought this was an awful match, in my honest opinion. Back and forth matchup between Tenta and Big Bubba, with Tenta keeping the pace of the match. Tenta ultimately hits Big Bubba with a bag of silver dollars, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is John Tenta. Hats off to Big John Tenta for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a taped fist match. It is Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus DDP. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Duggan and DDP, with DDP keeping the pace of the match. DDP ultimately hits his signature diamond cutter on Hacksaw Jim Duggan, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is DDP. Hats off to DDP for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a dog collar match. It is the Nasty Boys versus Public Enemy. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Nasty Boys and Public Enemy, with the Nasty Boys keeping the pace of the match. Jerry Sags ultimately hits Rocco Rock with the chain, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is the Nasty Boys. Hats off to the Nasty Boys for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Dean Malenko versus the Disco Inferno. Thought this was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between Malenko and Inferno, with Malenko keeping the pace of the match. Malenko ends up hitting a devastating brainbuster on Inferno for a near fall, but Malenko ultimately applies his signature Texas Cloverleaf on Disco Inferno, and your winner of the match by submission is Dean Malenko. Hats off to Dean Malenko for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Joe Gomez versus Steve McMichael. Thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Gomez and McMichael, with McMichael keeping the pace of the match. McMichael, though, ultimately hits his signature Tombstone Piledriver on Joe Gomez, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Steve McMichael. Hats off to Steve McMichael for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Nature Boy Ric Flair versus Conan for the WCW United States Championship. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Conan, with Flair keeping the pace of the match. Conan hits a press slam on Flair. Conan then also lands chops on Flair in the middle of the ring. Woman and Miss Elizabeth are on at ringside. Woman ends up getting involved in this match, with the referee being distracted. She ends up hitting Conan with her heel. Referee doesn't see it. Flair then goes for the cover on Conan, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW United States Champion, is the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Hats off to the Nature Boy Ric Flair for getting the win in that matchup, and at that time becoming the new WCW United States Champion. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Taskmaster and the Giant versus Arn Anderson and Chris Benoit. I thought this was an okay matchup. Taskmaster and Giant quickly attack Arn and Benoit. Turns into a back and forth matchup. Taskmaster and Benoit both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Giant hitting his signature choke slam on Arn Anderson, pins him for the 3. And your winners of the match are the Taskmaster and the Giant. Hats off to the Taskmaster and the Giant for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Bash at the Beach 1996. It is Kevin Nash and Scott Hall with a mystery partner versus Lex Luger, Sting, and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Like I said, Nash and Hall were waiting for their mystery partner to come down to the ring. The match itself was a really good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Scott Hall unloading strikes on Lex Luger. Lex ends up getting knocked out in this matchup. He is ringside. Nash and Hall were keeping the pace of the match. Hogan then makes his way down to the ring. Hogan ends up hitting his signature leg drop on Randy Savage. The crowd erupts, and this match ultimately ends in a no contest. A couple of things I'm going to say about Bash at the Beach 96 before I get out of here, man. Number one, was this the best Bash at the Beach? No, it's not. But what I will say, it's the most historic Bash at the Beach at the same time. And the reason why is because this was the first time that Hogan went from being babyface Hulk Hogan to Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And to be honest with you, this was a time, honestly, like I said, historic, man. This was something that I don't think anybody would have saw back then with Hulk Hogan turning heel and becoming Hollywood Hogan. But I think it was definitely needed, not only for the wrestling business, but for Hogan. I think a lot of people were getting tired of the yellow and red Hogan, or red and yellow Hogan. They wanted to see something different, and we got the black and white Hulk Hogan with the NWO. And for him teaming up with the likes of Hall and Nash, I mean, the way the storyline was portraying up to this match, up to this point, was that you had Scott Hall pretty much invading, I believe it was a random WCW Nitro where he invaded Nitro and, grabbed the microphone and, gave that infamous line where, you don't know why I'm here and you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here and stuff like that. And everybody knows Scott Hall at the time was Razor Ramon from WWE. So to see, Razor, aka Scott Hall, come over to WCW as well as Diesel, Kevin Nash, and even the last pay-per-view prior to Bash at the Beach, I mean, Eric Bischoff was giving, Hall and Nash an interview, and then next thing you know, Hall and Nash are pretty much beating the hell out of Eric Bischoff leading up to the match that they're going to have at Bash at the Beach with Luger, Sting, and Randy Savage. As far as Hogan, I think, there's been documentaries that have come out about, who was going to be the ultimate leader of the NWO, and I think it was a toss-up between Hogan and Savage. But I think Hogan was the better guy to be the leader of, the NWO. I think the NWO was always and forever will be synonymous with professional wrestling. Especially at a time when NWO was invented, or created. What Eric Bischoff did with WCW and beating WWE in the ratings for 83 weeks, shows you what kind of talent that they had on that roster as far as WCW. Their cruiserweight division, and I still say this even to this day, there was a cruiserweight match on this card with Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis. Their cruiserweight division in WCW is severely, at that time, underrated. The guys that walked in there as a cruiserweight, Rey Mysterio Jr., Psychosis, Dean Malenko, Chavo Guerrero, Juventud Guerrera. That's just to name a few. Chris Jericho, Benoit. The guys that came in that cruiserweight division and just took it by storm, man. And a lot of the pay-per-views, I would say probably from 96 on, a lot of the first matches were the cruiserweights. And honestly, some of the cruiserweight matches were better than the main event, in my honest opinion. And honestly, between those two matches, is probably the two best matches on this card, in my honest opinion. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis was a really great match to start the show. And like I just stated a minute ago, cruiserweight division was severely underrated. But this pay-per-view, it all came down to the main event. It all came down to who was going to be the third man to team up with Nash and Hall to go against, Team WCW, if you will. And, nobody really at that time imagined it was going to be Hulk Hogan. And that's why I said it's so historic, man, because this was the beginning of what we all know now as the NWO. And, the amount of names that joined the NWO is insane. Mike Rotunda, Ted DiBiase, Rick Rude, Dusty Rhodes even joined NWO. You also had, Scott Norton, Stevie Ray, Six, aka X-Pac. I mean, just to name a couple that joined NWO, I mean, the list is endless. I mean, even people over in New Japan, Masahiro Chono was even a member of the NWO. So the NWO was a big, big deal for WCW and pro wrestling. And, you know, what happened that night in the main event with Hogan turning heel and hitting that leg drop on Savage, it was more than just a leg drop, man. This was something that was going to be, you know, they were creating something that was going to be absolutely insane for the wrestling business, turn the wrestling business upside down, and turn it on its heel, man. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, Hall, Nash, and Hogan really, you know, they were the three kings of WCW and pro wrestling at that time, man. And everybody, you know, wanted to be a part of the NWO. It was the same thing with, you know, DX, Degeneration X, with, you know, Road Dogg, Billy Gunn, Hunter, Shawn Michaels, Chyna. You know, there was always those two big factions at that time during the, you know, the mid 90s where, you know, are you team, you know, Degeneration X or are you team NWO? And it was just great for the business, man. It really was. I mean, you had the same thing now with AEW and WWE, but it's not the same, man. I mean, the amount of talent that was on both rosters at that time. I mean, you're talking Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and, you know, WCW, you got Hall, Nash, Hogan, Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, I mean, Rey Mysterio Jr., Dean Malenko, just name a couple, man. Harlem Heat, Steiner Brothers, you know, it was crazy at that time with the amount of talent that walked through WWE and the amount of talent that walked through WCW, man, and they just went head to head every Monday night, man, and made for great television and great wrestling, all in all, man. So definitely a historic event at Bash at the Beach '96 for sure, but like I said, a couple of matches on here that I liked was Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psychosis, and definitely the main event. The rest of the card, man, I thought it was kind of weak, to be honest with you. John Tenta versus Big Bubba. I stated this in my last review. It's a shame, man. You know, Big Bubba ended up moving on and went to WWE and invented the Boss Man character, and I think he did a great job. I mean, he went on to work with WWE again and work under Vince McMahon and, you know, be a part of the Vince McMahon regime, if you will, at the time in the mid 90s, and he did a great job. He did a really good job, but can't really say the same thing for John Tenta. I think, you know, John Tenta, his best days were behind him. I think, you know, when he was Earthquake and, you know, teaming up with Typhoon as a Natural Disasters, I think they were a great tag team. You know, it could have been multi-time tag team champions, but, you know, once John Tenta moved over to WCW, I felt like they didn't really have a place for him. It's the same thing with Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I mean, Duggan's a legend. So is Earthquake. But it got to a point where some of these guys just came over to WCW, I felt like, just to fill a void because who they were and what their name, you know, who they, you know, once were, and they came over to WCW, and it just wasn't the same. I mean, they brought John Tenta in from being Earthquake to putting him in the Dungeon of Doom with the likes of Brutus the Barber, who was Zodiac, Ming, who AKA is Haku, and just, you know, random select guys from WWE that came over to WCW trying to make a stable. You know, pretty much ran by Kevin Sullivan, which I believe at the time was the main booker for WCW at that time. And it just didn't fit. It really didn't fit. And like I said, it was different for Big Bubba. He ended up moving on and reinventing the Boss Man character and had a really decent run once he returned to WWE, in my honest opinion. So, but this silver dollar match between Tenta and Bubba, I definitely could have done without it. I hate the gimmick matches with a passion, so definitely didn't need this matchup. The Tate Fist match, it's kind of the same deal. Jim Duggan and DDP. I'm not really big on the gimmick matches, whether it's WWE or WCW, and, you know, with all due respect to WCW, they had some of the worst gimmick matches I've ever heard of in my entire life. So, definitely one of those matches I could have done without. Nasty Boys versus Public Enemy in a dog collar match. It was okay, but it was one of those things where you got tired of seeing the Nasty Boys go up against Public Enemy. You kind of wanted to shake things up and get, you know, Nasty Boys, you know, new challengers, new tag team or something like that to go against, but just didn't happen. And the same thing with Public Enemy, man. Their best days were in ECW, in my honest opinion. I think WCW really had no idea how to capitalize on Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge from ECW, in my honest opinion, man. They were a great tag team in ECW, made a name, big name for themselves in ECW, but once they were acquired from Eric Bischoff in WCW, I don't think they had any idea what the hell to do with Public Enemy, in my honest opinion. Dean Malenko versus Disco Inferno. Honestly, I thought this match was an embarrassment. Not from Dean Malenko, but from Disco Inferno. Look, man, And I've stated this multiple times in the past, and I don't care. I'll reiterate it again. Disco Inferno can't wrestle. I'm sorry. If the shots are fired, the shots are fired. Disco can't wrestle, man. And to be honest with you, Dean Malenko was literally carrying this entire match, and Malenko was wiping the floor with Inferno. I mean, the one thing I'll give Disco Inferno is the same thing I said about Marcus Bagwell. Inferno was better when he was teaming up with Alex Wright, because Alex Wright can carry the match, where Alex Wright, unfortunately, has to take the load of the match and do all the grunt work, and here comes Inferno just picking up the scraps. But it worked as a tag team. Inferno, hell, I don't even know how Inferno even got into the NWO. I'm pretty sure he probably begged because his job was at stake at that point. Because you can honestly answer me this question. After Inferno and WCW went out of business, what the hell else did Disco Inferno do? Nothing. Nothing. Nobody, even in the wrestling capacity of the wrestling world, gives a damn about what Disco Inferno did after wrestling. Seriously. And if you're a Disco Inferno fan, you really had to shake your head and really question why you are a wrestling fan. Disco Inferno can't wrestle, man. Seriously. There's other guys that come in that actually can do a hell of a lot of job better wrestling that came into WCW, a year or two later that did a hell of a job. Guys like Glacier can probably definitely out-wrestle Disco Inferno. Hell, Ernest the Cat Miller can out-wrestle Disco Inferno. In my truthful, honest opinion, I think Disco Inferno's trash, man, personally. And to put him against Malenko in this matchup was embarrassing. Malenko literally looked like he was already agitated the fact that he had to wrestle this dude, and he had to carry the match. It was ridiculous. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Disco Inferno was even a cruiserweight at that time. And Malenko still won the match. Shows you how good Malenko is, and Malenko's severely underrated. Joe Gomez versus Steve McMichael. I don't know anything about Joe Gomez. I'm not going to sit here and lie to y'all. I don't. Steve McMichael, I know a little bit about, former Chicago Bear. In the last event they had, I believe it was Kevin Green and McMichael versus Flair and Anderson, where McMichael kind of turned his back on Kevin Green. He hit Kevin Green with the briefcase and, pretty much got himself in line with Flair and joining the Four Horsemen. So I think this match between McMichael and Gomez was actually one of the first main matches that McMichael had being a Four Horseman. And I think he did a decent job. I mean, his finish was kind of a knockoff to The Undertaker with the Tombstone Piledriver, but McMichael really held his own. And I said this the last time on my last event that I reviewed, that McMichael was one of those guys that came in as a different, didn't come in as a wrestler. He came in from a wrestling background, former Chicago Bear, wanted to learn the business. And I think McMichael did a hell of a job of learning the business and learning his craft and becoming his own pro wrestler. Four Horsemen, I would say this. Was he Four Horsemen material? No, absolutely not. I've stated this for multiple times in the past. It would have been cool for me as a fan. And I'm not saying this ever, obviously this never happened, but as a fan, what the Horsemen bring to the table and their, athletic ability in the ring. Especially when you look at guys like, Flair, Ole, and Arn Anderson. You look at Barry Windham. You look at Tully Blanchard and what they brought into the business. Dean Malenko fits that mold perfectly, as well as Chris Benoit. The only other guy I would have added besides Steve McMichael would be Eddie Guerrero. I think Eddie Guerrero teaming up with Benoit and Malenko and, having Ric Flair kind of be, the leader and Arn kind of be like, not the babysitter, but the bodyguard of those guys. Or it would be Arn, Benoit, Malenko, and Guerrero. And, Ric Flair will obviously still be the leader of the Four Horsemen, but kind of be doing his own thing with the backup of the Four Horsemen. But eventually we kind of got a taste of that a little bit, if you will, with, Guerrero teaming up with Malenko and Benoit and Saturn when they all joined WWE, known as the Radicals. But that stable didn't last long, which is an absolutely shame. It's a shame. Because maybe not Perry Saturn, but, Benoit teaming up with Guerrero and Malenko as a team. Whew, man. You want to talk about one hell of a team. That's a hell of a team. But, like I said, long story short, man, I think McMichael did a hell of a job coming in, learning his craft, becoming a pro wrestler, and, he learned a lot as far as being a pro wrestler. He gained a lot of, knowledge in the pro wrestling business and, kind of put it all together in his own craft and did a hell of a job. So, again, hats off to McMichael for getting the win over Joe Gomez. And then the main event, really. The main event, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and the mystery partner versus Lex Luger, Sting, and Randy Savage. It's pretty much what this event was all about. Who was going to be the third man for Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Nobody could have imagined at that time it was going to be Hogan, but Hogan made his way down to the ring, kind of dropped hit the leg drop on, Randy Savage, and had the crowd go crazy. And it was just a historical moment, man. It was one of those things where it was like, wow, WCW at that time, when this happened, was really cooking with gasoline at this point. And the wheels were off, man. They were full steam ahead of what they wanted to do at that time, and they were the top wrestling promotion at that time. For 83 weeks, man, they were beating the doors off the WWE for quite a while. Where, obviously WWE had to change their whole format and go into the Attitude Era and compete head-to-head with WCW every Monday night, and made for the Monday Night Wars, and it made for great television, great pro wrestling, and it was just crazy, man. It was absolutely awesome. So, like I said, definitely a historic moment for all professional wrestling at Bash at the Beach 1996. But like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, I always give these pay-per-views a solid rating from 1 out of 10. Based upon the Rey Mysterio Jr. match and Psychosis, and the main event being that Hulk Hogan turned heel and joined Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and how historic that night was in professional wrestling. I'm going to be a little biased when I say this probably, but I'm going to have to give Bash at the Beach 1996 a solid 6.5 at best, man. Just based upon, like I said, the first match between Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis, and Hogan turning heel and joining NWO, or creating the NWO with Hall and Nash. So I'm going to have to give Bash at the Beach 1996 a solid 6.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW's Bash at the Beach 1996. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.